the financial period that we're all marked? When is the financial period? Just quickly, because I've got another question.
So no, actually, it's a fair question, actually, Councillor Graham. Certainly in terms of our forecasting around uptake, there's probably two key dates in the first couple of years. The first date is enough uptake to justify financial close. That's, in other words, everybody says, well, we can see an uptake profile, we can see revenue, we've got sufficient confidence around the contractual security of that revenue, etc., to justify building, right? So that's the first decision. And financial close is what we're targeting. So if that's April, then great, we'll need to see that contracted. The second issue is that there's a 3-year build period. So what won't be stopped through that build period is a focus on contracting and securing additional revenue water.
Yeah, okay, I get all that, and I can sign off on that. Yeah. My question is, in 3 months, you're going to try and convert 100 expression of interests, which isn't enough to commercially get this project off the line, into contracts. Do you think that's a bit ambitious? Given that no one works in January in New Zealand?
Look, I haven't. I'm not familiar with all the detail of the Butcher report, but I'm aware that we've run scenarios, and I've seen information suggesting 40% uptake by the time water was flowing would be an.
Yeah, the expression of interest,
yes,
yep.
But 40% uptake, and we're at 47% now under expression of interest. And if we were targeting, for example, 40% uptake by 2017, I'd suggest that means we are looking in quite good shape at the moment. It will be very busy in the new year, certainly for me. I'm not denying that. And as I mentioned before, it may make sense to have the final CP around this project going or not going, sitting around uptake.
Well, the answer is it will make sense to have that, actually. Yep.
So, I take your point, Councillor Graham.
Councillor Barker.
Just on the figures that you've got on the wall there, it surprises me in one way, but not in another, that the change in land use is going to be effectively less red meat, more dairying. When this proposal was first mooted, people were looking at it being a lot more arable land, intensification of the use of it, cropping, I guess. But what that says to me is that the shift has been from red meat to dairy. Is that what you expected to be the outcome? That's the only change I can see.
Yeah, well, I'll make a comment on that. These numbers are very, very similar to the McFarlane Rural Business Analysis of mixed land use that we built into the feasibility project. So those numbers are not at all surprising. And the second point I'd make is that reality is these are intensified systems. So therefore, yes, there's an expansion of dairy, but it's an expansion of red meat production because those systems are vastly more efficient in production sense than is the status quo. So on net aggregate of production, that's lifted on all those land uses.
Another question. I'm conscious some haven't asked questions yet, but Councillor Belford. Yeah.
I have plenty of questions, if the space allows. Andrew, you just mentioned 36 months, the construction, so I assume that's what you're negotiating out with the preferred vendor.
Yeah, yep.
The Tonkin and Tonkin original report had a 54-month build process, so that's been shrunk by 2 years?
Essentially.
Any questions on finance with HBRIC? There was other parts of the report. Councillor Belford.
Just when we had our last discussion of this, when Andy Pearce was here, he described the term sheet that is being developed for investors as a exquisitely detailed document that was going to embody all the different consent conditions and so forth, so that investors would walk in eyes wide open as to what kind of obligations we're going to lay where with irrigators and so forth. It seems, and your report today is saying that term sheet will be developed in January. Again, it seems to me it's something that would ultimately have to reflect conditions being determined by the Board of Inquiry, not finally until April. And in any event, I guess I have a scheduling question about how that's possible. But in any event, this term sheet seems like a rather crucial document. And is that something that we as a council would ever get a look at before it's put in cement?
Well, what you'll get is you'll get a limited partnership agreement which reflects the commercial terms of the entire deal ultimately in the framework. But the term sheet sets out and I should be explicit, the term sheet I'm referring to is simply for CII. We already have term sheet across the other part of the investor network. So all we're doing is cementing in another part of the capital structure, and then that term sheet that I'm referring to there. And absolutely, the way in which this fits together and works is that essentially what we've done is we've aggregated a team of investors. That team of investors then has a role around a group we call the Investor Representative Committee that oversees, in a sense, the major elements of the work program, the major condition precedents, and assesses the impacts of those on their own investment position, and then it assesses that on the aggregate investment position. So, if you like, the due diligence process around this project is actually happening as we build it. But be really clear, that term sheet is simply in relation to one part of the capital structure with one potential investor.
For the potential investors in this, are there differing returns for each investor? Like, for example, you've said Ngāi Tahu are going to be investors, what's still on the Trust Power, HBRIC, the state. Are all investors going to get the same return out of this? And if not, what's going to be the differences and why is that?
So, the way I'll answer that question, I'm not going to talk about explicit returns here. That's a commercial issue. But certainly the private sector investors will expect a rate of return that fits with what they perceive to be their risk profile. That's part of the negotiation. HBRC, via its LTP, has indicated a preferred return, which is being modelled into how we're assessing this deal. And in turn, CII, or Crown Irrigation Investments, is if you look at the public information they post on, they've posted, their returns could vary from preservation of cost, preservation of capital or real dollars, simply through to commercial returns. So the reality is, cost of the investor framework, there'll be a blend of different return ratios. But having said that, at the point when when uptake hits a trajectory that's flowing a full revenue stream, all of those returns hit a commercial return level. So the answer I'm giving you is there are various different rates of return. There is a view that there are different values there from the public sector, but in turn, ultimately, the scheme for any investor left in it will be at commercial returns.
From on the financials, just to cut to the chase there, Andrew, we need to confirm to the public that the investment which the regional council will be making in this dam will be subsidising the other investors. That's the first thing. The second thing is we also need to confirm for the public that in the first stage, that if we as a council or as a community don't want to proceed with this, we will be paying back Ngāi Tahu and Trust Power for their upfront money. And that needs to be confirmed for the public. The third thing I'd like is, have we funded anybody else in the EPA process outside HBRIC? Has anybody who supports us been funded by us?
So let's go back to the series of questions there.
Well, they weren't actually, they were confirmations.
Well, I'm happy to say that the private sector investors are sitting in there with an at-risk investment in the space. Now, that at-risk investment says that if the scheme considered to be not viable from an uptake point of view, not viable from a
Microphone, Andrew.
not viable from a point of view of the consent conditions, etc., then that's their risk, like it's our risk.
That's true.
All right. So the point being,
If we vote against it as a council, then we pay them back.
well, it would depend on what basis you voted against it. Yes, and I don't want
We
to.
said we weren't going to invest the 80 million.
Well, if you had particular reasons for doing that, which were related to condition precedent issues, validly, that would be a reasonably sensible thing to do.
No, it wouldn't be. That's not true. They make a commercial judgment. They make it. Well, I want to make a statement. They make a commercial judgment, and this is a preliminary stage, but they're not at risk. They're the same as that we're at risk. As a matter of fact, we are underwriting their initial investment.
Well, actually, if I can look, without getting into a detailed commercial discussion here, the first point I'd make is they are taking risk. They're taking uptake risk just like anybody else is, right? Second point is they're taking construction risk. So there's a balance of risk which will be shared across the various investors, with that risk located against who's the most appropriate to take it.
Let's go to some other councillors. We've a couple of people dominating us. Let's go around the table. Councillor Dick, have you got any questions in regard to the HBRIC report?
No, I've got no questions. My comment is that this matter is evolving, and the pieces of the jigsaw are coming together. And the appropriate time to debate it thoroughly is when we actually have got a business plan to consider.
Councillor Hewitt, you got any questions in regard to any other part of the paper? I'm going to move us along here.
Well, I'm going to take the liberty of making a comment because I think it's important at this point in time that Councillor Barker's brought up the dairying component and a decline in the red meat sector. So I just want to be clear that these per hectare figures are a small portion of Central Hawke's Bay, and it's important that we don't get carried away with a dairying conversion, because that's certainly not what those figures are pointing out in the whole area of Central Hawke's Bay at all. There's still a number of farms that'll be on the shoulder of any conversions or any water uptake that will most definitely be part of the red meat sector going forward. So just keep it in perspective.
No further questions, Mr. Chair.
On reading your report there, it seems as though the timeframes are really critical in this. Can you maybe just elaborate on just how critical they are with regards to getting to our decision, and then the ongoing aspect of the build, given the seasonal aspect to what needs to be done in the construction?
In broad terms, I guess there's if the project doesn't get to financial close within a reasonable time frame here, then effectively a construction season is lost. All right. Now, a construction season is lost is a commercial and contractual issue that we'll have to look at pretty closely in any agreement we enter into with a conditional agreement we enter into with constructors. So. What I would say is that absolutely this thing's a critical path. Once you're into these processes, it makes sense to arrive at a decision, make that decision, go or not go, because if it's a half-baked decision or it's lack of clarity, then we'll end up in a no man's land. So I guess what I'm emphasising here is that within reason, I'm keen to know that the council's got to run its own process as a shareholder and as an independent investor of anything that HBRIC says, just as the others do. But timeliness is important, because lose a construction season, lose half a construction season, that has a major impact on revenues and costs in contractual relationships. So, it is tight, always has been tight, but perhaps I can make two other points, and that is that, in my experience, getting to a point where a decision can be made clearly and within a realistic time frame, and whether it's a yes or a no is better. And even if it's no, it's still better, because you just take the uncertainty out of things. So that's a strong-held view of mine. And secondly, in my experience, I've got a reasonable amount of commercial experience outside of this organisation. In any process that involves people making a decision, commercial decision, again, having a deadline and a time to make that decision is really important. So turning to uptake, I think it's clear the farming community has within reason, subject to a viable scheme, will have a choice to make. Yeah. But they shouldn't have a choice that can drag on for the next 10 years. Quite right. So that's the message we're giving, via myself and Duncan, to the farming community. And we'll be doing it a bit more robustly. Te Rā in January, probably, Duncan.
I'd like to move this along. I just remind councillors that this is a monthly report, so we keep coming back to this every month at council meetings. Okay, so sorry if people feel underdone, but I'd like to move and second it, and then ask for some comment around the table. You got two questions you'd like to throw in?
Just got one.
Let's have three more questions, and then we'll move to the recommendations. Councillor Barker.